Today we are going to talk about the different models and the methods of learning. So the different psychological models of learning. So we're going to talk about classical conditioning, operant conditioning. We're going to talk about the difference between negative reinforcement, positive reinforcement, negative punishment, positive punishment. And we're also going to touch on the different kinds of learning methods. So we're going to talk about the method of Loci, the peg world method, and then long-term potential. So we're going to cover those topics today, but we're going to start off with the different methods of conditioning. So first we're going to start with classical conditioning, and this is also called respondent. And this is when you pair a conditioned stimulus with an unconditioned stimulus to get a conditioned response. So the most common example of this that people give is Pavlov's dogs. So Pavlov had dogs, and the conditioned stimulus, which is something that naturally happens, is when a dog sees food, they salivate. So that is a conditioned stimulus because that is already just an innate instinct that happens. Now, an unconditioned stimulus would be a bell ringing. So he would pair the conditioned stimulus, which is food, and the unconditioned stimulus, which is a bell ringing, to get that conditioned response of salivating. So he would pair them so much to where eventually when he removed the food aspect and just had the ring of the bell, the dog salivated because he associated that with food. So that is a conditioned response. That is classical conditioning. So we'll say Ivan Pavlov, dogs salivating at ring of bell. And this is really what we think about normal conditioning. Next is operant conditioning. This is also called instrumental. So this has to do with reinforcement. This is when one particular response is reinforced in some way, and we'll talk about the different kinds of reinforcements in a second, but just know that this is when a particular response is reinforced. And the most common person you will associate this with is B.F. Skinner, and this was his mouse in a box experiment where he would give an electric shock for a desired behavior. So we talked about reinforcement. Now there are different kinds of reinforcement. There's positive, negative, and then there's also punishment, positive and negative punishment. So we have positive reinforcement, negative reinforcement, positive punishment, negative punishment. All right, so for positive reinforcement, we are going to talk about giving a positive stimulus. So present, desirable. So this is just classic rewarding a behavior. So if a pet or something does something that is a desirable behavior, we'll give them a treat. That is positive reinforcement. Now, negative reinforcement is removing undesirable stimulus. So removing an undesirable stimulus would mean something bad and uncomfortable is happening right now. Until someone does a behavior that you want them to learn, then you'll remove an undesirable stimulus. So, for example, if you want a mouse to learn how to press a button, if a mouse is standing on a shocked surface and it's being actively shocked, this is a terrible example, and the mouse is being actively shocked, when it finally presses the button and does the behavior that you want it to do, the shocking will stop. So that is negative reinforcement because it just removed an undesirable stimulus. It reinforced the behavior. Now, punishment is the opposite. Positive punishment is presenting a negative stimulus. So this is just kind of classic punishment. And let's say you have a mouse and you don't want it to touch this button. Every time it touches the button, it's going to get shocked. So that is a presenting of an undesirable stimulus. It's presenting a shock and it's punishing the behavior. Last one, negative punishment, is removing a desirable stimulus. So you can think of this as if there is a child who reacted badly in school or did something bad, a parent would punish them by taking away, let's say, their phone. So that is negative punishment. It's removing something that's good. So the important things to remember with this is that positive versus negative, that has to do with either adding or removing. And so this can be confusing because a lot of the times people think positive, you're rewarding something, and negative, you're punishing something, but it's not that case. Positive and negative is just the addition or the removal of a stimulus. And then reinforcement versus punishment, this has to do with approval versus disapproval. So this has to do if you want to reinforce the behavior so they keep doing it, or you want to hinder them from doing that behavior. Those are the different kinds of reinforcement of operant conditioning. Now we're going to quickly move on to just the different types of learning methods, so how people can learn in the different terms that they coined. We have the method of Loci, which is going to be when you associate items on a list with a sequence of familiar locations. So we can remember this as Loci, kind of like locations. So if you're trying to memorize items on a list, you're going to associate with like a location. So that is a type of learning method. Now, the second one we're going to talk about is the peg world method. And this is assigning images to a sequence of numbers. Not an easy way to remember this because the name doesn't really have anything to do with it actually is, but if you're trying to memorize a bunch of images, let's say like in an order, you're going to assign them to a sequence of numbers, and that's a method of learning. And the last thing that we're going to talk about really quickly is long-term potentiation, which has to do with learning. And this, getting into more of the physiological response of learning, is going to be an increase in a synapse firing potential. And so this is going to be due to a brief, rapid stimulation. And so this is what we would call the neural basis for both learning and memory. All right, so that is long-term potentiation, kind of the neurological effects of how we learn new information, how we store memories. But that is all I have for you for the methods of learning. Not a whole lot, but this notes sheet will be on the link tree. It will be under psychology, sociology notes, and then it will be titled learning. So that is it for today.